I got a interruption in the feed, and so I apologize to anyone who was following that live stream because I didn't mean to interrupt it abruptly like that. But sometimes I can get different interruptions to the bandwidth, and it's difficult to reboot it like that. And my normal little my normal little half-ass technique of getting it rebooted, it had to I had to shut it all the way off and come back. But I was saying, I'll just put this. There's a context of another video, a live stream where I have the same outfit on, and I was talking a little bit about Arthur Avalon, who I quote a lot. That's a pseudonym in nom de plume for a real knight, Sir John Woodrow of the High Court of India, from England originally in the late 19th and early 20th century. He was an eminent and excellent scholar and also a justice. But he would write under the name of Arthur Avalon, but he didn't actually give a lot of context into why he would select that name, other than it's a homage to his collaborators both here and hereafter, heretofore and hereafter. But but then I talked to another person. I talked to a man. Every once in a while, I'm very open with people, and I engage. I'm comfortable engaging with people who would appear different than me or from different walks of life. And I was having a conversation with this man. We were originally talking about. I was at a coffee shop, and there was a chair, like the coffee. It's a famous coffee shop in the Twin Cities called Dunn Brothers. They have a couple of locations in the Twin Cities, but they're a famous coffee shop, and they have excellent coffee. Like, probably it's actually out of this world. You may not, even if you don't know very much about coffee, the first time you have a coffee there, I'd imagine you'll remember that the rest of your life, whatever age you were, even as a child, as an adolescent, as a teenager, as an adult, as a seasoned adult, as an elderly adult. The first time you would have Dunn Brothers coffee, it'll make an impression on you, and especially if you're doing something cool. Like, I had been playing guitar. One of the reasons that I actually play guitar now is because I had a phase. I came home from college once when I was young, and I had been interested in music, but not. I didn't have aspirations. I didn't think of myself as about to be a guitarist then, but I was picking up. I was outside of a job. I was unemployed for like a few weeks with family, and I would be practicing guitar a lot. I had this book. It's called Play Guitar. It's an excellent introduction to guitar. But when I was playing that, when I was playing that book, I had been getting some chops because I got a question asked if I'm Jamaican. I'll feel that I'll get back to that. Someone asked me if I'm Jamaican. But I know so I had been getting some chops because if you play guitar consistently for even a matter of days, you really it blossoms in you a lot, because it's not actually how long, it's how frequent and how recently frequent it doesn't matter how long or how long of frequent. The guitar is how frequent of recent is where your chops are, because your chops aren't the same from one week to another month to another year, as you've been playing different materials. So it's kind of like, what have you done for me lately? What have you practiced for yourself lately? Is how guitar go. But I've been practicing guitar a lot, and then I had some of this Dunn Brothers coffee, heaven forbid, or thank heaven, as you would appreciate that. And the sensation of that real, true coffee like that, the aesthetic, the vibe of playing. At that time, I didn't have enough courage or insight that I could actually write music as soon or probably quicker than I would learn it from someone else. Wherever you are in life, however familiar you are with the guitar or not, you can write original music that sounds cooler to you and other people sooner than you could learn to cover other people's music. And I actually think that covering other music is great. It's a great way to be expressive as an artist. I had a brief lesson with a great teacher about after I had come into my own and left my maestro of a classical teacher. And this teacher was wanting me to do covers. Like, he wanted me to cover Nirvana. And I was like, yeah, but I kind of stay away from covers because that ain't my thing. That's not my creative thing. He's like, no. I think this would be the exact appropriate thing for you, because I hear what you can do. You can do some cool stuff. And I would recommend that you actually start doing covers now. Now that you're comfortable enough to write your own music, I yet recommend that you do covers. That would be the next move for you. And I didn't know how deep of a thing that was. That was the exact appropriate thing for him to say, because once you can actually get to the point of having confidence in writing music for yourself, that's when, and you actually find something of your style. You can present your style, your originality to a teacher, a maestro like that, and you can get actual certain look and rapport with them. You just actually found your voice as an artist in that moment. The sooner you could play something that would surprise and or impress your preceptor, you're better, as you would understand that you're now actually a fellow peer. You're now a professor now of something. If you can hang with the other professors, and if you can publish original material, the way you become a professor is you go to a lot of school, you do a lot of research, but none of that. Even the professors mock people that do that. They say all but degree. The professors would mock someone that goes actually attain the status of a fellow professor, a degree, a PhD. But all that merely means is that you are now presenting original content. Like in academics, they would say a thesis. You're presenting a thesis that's based on scholar. The thesis actually doesn't have to be based on scholarship. That's the thing. People would think that to have a PhD, you need to write a thesis. That's true, but also that thesis has to be based on scholarship. Not necessarily. It has to be based on scholarship for you to not get cited for plagiarism. But if you actually had a compelling thesis without any of the regular channels of research at all, if it's that compelling of a thesis, it's that compelling of a thesis. If it's a thesis that's as good as any of your peers, the PhDs, any letters that's next to their name, if your thesis is as good as them, if not better than theirs, you're now as good as them, is not better than them, even as they're calling themselves professor like that. Even as you went by your own way, however you come up by that, whether it's through vetted or traditional channels of research and not, or probably better for not being so. But the only value that research has in the actual the channels of how it had been done is just that you won't get strung up or kicked out of something because you're anticipating that if you do it by this rote, this traditional means of citing things, that you won't get called out for that. But that's probably exactly when you would get called out, is that, yeah, here you go trying to use this other stuff, but you're also trying to be original and also trying to use other people's material. Yeah, I call cap plagiarism right there, buddy. So you can probably some things you can only do so long until you get caught. You can only be an academic so long until you get caught. You can only be an academic so long. You can only be in academia so long. Academic so long until somebody call you out on that plagiarism stuff but what else are we doing with all this citations? Is that not plagiarism? But because we do it the agreed upon way, it's not plagiarism. But all I'm saying is that, so too, if you're an artist or taking lessons, the sooner that you would flesh out an idea that would be inconceivable to a teacher, or that too inconceivable for them, that you would do that and that would impress them, you're actually now a fellow at that point. You really actually are. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can just be a simple lick. But so too, if you just pick up an instrument, you can sooner create original things that sound cool to you and others before you would learn how to play anything about anything, just going with your ear. But all I meant to say is that uh, but Arthur Avalon, he didn't that was my experience. For me, is that I've been working up a lot of chops like that, and then but at that time I didn't venture or think that it was viable, or I didn't think that it was worthy to write music with. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't at that time, with my notions and pretensions, and were more so notions, because I wasn't presenting myself, so they wouldn't have been pretensions. But with my notions is that I didn't think that you could be viable as a singer songwriter until you had learned music theory and other people's songs first to do that. And at a certain point you get permission to do that. And that's one of the great things about my teacher, is that he said some of the two great artists that I've known in my life have been the visual artist, my brother, and then this maestro of the same thing in their way. The maestro said that he would rather have me playing original stuff now, writing my own music now, than go on for a long time playing other people's stuff. Is just do your thing now, and then you can learn other people's stuff too. But write your stuff now, what occurs to you. So every time he would give me lessons, he said, I'm giving you lessons to practice, but I also want you to write, to practice writing your own music. So commendation to him for that. And then I asked my brother too. My brother's a compelling visual artist. If you see the way he does visually, it's humbling, because you're like, where would a person even start to do that? But my brother said that whatever you think is cool, anything that speaks to you, a character, a scene, an idea, a thought, a memory, a fear, anything, start an object, a person, start with that. That's your inroad to being an artist. But then I had a weightlifting trainer who was also a guitarist that I've mentioned a couple of times on here, and he said that most of your great players, guitar players, their inroad to the instrument was a lick of some kind. So either they conceived of a lick or they transcribed a lick, and then that's the beginning of their familiarity with the guitar. And once you can please your once you can please yourself, you can please another person, and once you can please another person, you can please yourself. Now you're a real player like that, no more, no less than that. And it can be one lick like that. Um, but um, uh, but with Arthur Avalon, he never. So what got me hooked on guitar and coffee was the experience in the aesthetic of drinking Dunn Brothers coffee in my parents' unoccupied bedroom, playing guitar after I'd been playing for about a month like that. It was the one of the times I've actually felt power in my life. I felt real power when I did that. Just the creativity of that, and the sensation of that was my first time with the sensation of being an artist. It's interesting. Like now, I can carry a tune more and more. So I can sing like I can sing I can sing unsupported music. So I like a lot of times when I sing music, I'll have a reference. Like I might be listening to something, but I can enunciate and vocalize myself and carry music without being accompanied by any instrument or any person. Um, but um, but so too, when you're a singer, and I was listening tonight. I attended a showcase tonight. I participate in the here I participate. I haven't been solicited to say this, but I participate in a venue in a app called Artium. It's a connection and an inroad to take lessons with maestros in India at low as little as it. It's no more expensive than a lesson would cost in America, but a lot of times less than that too. Is the platform Artium, Artium, and I got a lot further with my music after doing uh, after taking lessons on that platform with some maestros in India. I made a lot of progress doing that, and then so I was attending one of their showcasings tonight. It had popped up on my feed, and they were listening to some people of all different ages, all different backgrounds and styles and abilities. They were singing some American music. It's interesting to hear these people from India breaking down American music and the difference between like blues and jazz, between what because they were having more so students from India or the East, and there's those students as much as they have beautiful traditions there. They were singing some of the music from that endemic to that area too, but also they appreciated American music, and that's kind of beautiful that people that didn't grow up around American music would really aspire and love American music, and they think that American music is hard to sing, but a lot of people in America would think that the music from India is hard to sing, and like a lot of my teachers, I had teachers at I went to Berklee College of Music, and the mascot is the Jazz Cats. So at this school full of Jazz Cats, one of my ear training teachers, he was exactly impressed by Indian music. He thought that there's almost nothing more sophisticated and beautiful and virtuosic in terms of harmony than Indian music, and like the microtonal plaintive. I don't mean to sound technical when I say that, but microtonal means that is that it's chromatic in that there's more inflections, and diatonic means the whole scale. So it's a combination of whole and half steps. So like the from one white key to another white key is a whole step on a piano. If there's a black key in between it, if there's no black key in between it, then it's a half step. But so too is a black to a white key or a white to a black key a half step. So when you're playing regular music, like what all of our popular music is based on, it's the Western diatonic series, or I'm sorry, it's the diatonic scale series of major and minor scales. That's combinations of whole and half steps, based on the premise of whole and half step in the terms of whole half, whole half. There's there's some convenient mnemonic memory devices to remember those, and one of the best for the major scale is we went wabbit, like that. That's whole half, whole half, WWH. But then you have a couple. I think you have a couple iterations of major, and then more of minor, and then more sophisticated ones like in exotic and other cultures that can work within the framework, that would be like your exotic scales. But then just any combination at all. When I think chromatic means colorful, so when you're talking about jazz music, I think that veers away from the strict whole and half, whole and major and minor scales, and it's more sophisticated in that, and it uses more of the full range of the notes, and some of the closer jumps and approximations that makes it more colorful, but also more complex. That's chromatic, but it's similar to micro. So the music in India, they have less of a jump between some of the notes, and so thereby it's more technical and reined in, but also more profound and expressive. Would make it called microtonal. So I think so. Western tonal means diatonic tonal. Tone just means so you have a note. A note is like the spelling of a sound. You have the pitch is the frequency of that sound, and then the tone is the characteristic of the pitch that can redouble and reiterate at lower and lesser intervals, like the octave. So you have different forms of C. So if you have a piano, you have like at least like probably 8 versions of any note. That'd be like those are, so you have 8. You have technically 12 notes, 7 natural notes, the white keys, and 5 unnatural notes, or 5 it's like, what's the word for it, you have a natural and a it's either flat or sharp, but those are, so when something is spelled the same way, and like when the same thing means the same way but it's spelled differently, that's called enharmonic. So so it has the same meaning and value in terms of sound, but in what it will express, but the way that it's written and that it's communicated, there's different ways you can write something so that it's like a form of shorthand. The other word for that would be nomenclature, like a system of symbols and or words that are specific to a topic or a field or a discipline or a craft. That's called nomenclature. So the nomenclature of music, the way of writing music, is the formalities and the traditions within that make it interchangeable and interposable. It's like to write one thing as another is to interpose it, and what makes the music interchangeable and interposable from and transposable from one transpose, like when you write something, that's like a transcript, and then to write it differently is to transpose it. To do that for between musicians, that's the spelling of it, but it's called enharmonic. When it's interchangeable, but it's as is expedient, and also the tradition of it is how it be done. But then when one thing is said one way or a different way, but it means the same thing, that's called enharmonic. And that word is a little bit of buzzword that will run people off very quickly. Most people don't like that word, enharmonic. Both people learning music and people that are into music, that is a word that's like a buzzword, that a tripwire, that the conversation ceases right there as soon as you say enharmonic, because people exactly think you're being pretentious, or they're either intimidated or they're rant. And I just saw some people go out the live when I said that, but just for the purpose of learning, is that's what that word actually means, enharmonic. But it will actually exactly run people off, even to the moment that I'm making that statement. But enharmonically, a keyboard will have at least like a full 88 key keyboard, I think, will have like at least 8 octaves. So that's 8 versions of any sound, but all those are the same. So, but the white keys are the natural notes. The black keys are called the accidentals. But the accidentals, they can be spelled as and understood as either sharp or flat. Any accidental, any black note on a keyboard is actually both a sharp and a flat, and harmonically as the spelling goes. But it would be, if they're going upwards, I think they're normally written as sharps, and if they're going down, they're written as flats. But those are all notes. So all the C's that occur on a piano are the exact same C. All the accidentals, like the sharps and flats, they're the same one. They're at any range. That particular key, the one that looks like that, the pattern of that's the note. Then the pitch is different at all those octaves, but it's unique. It has the same characteristic through all those enharmonic spellings of that note. All those C's or all those D's, respectively means unto themselves. all the C's respectively, all the D's respectively, or any other note respectively, they're the same note. They're written the same way. It'd be distinguished if they're in a if they're transposed in their transcript. It'd be distinguished which octave they're occurring in, so that they can be played the way that they were conceived of. You actually don't write music, you conceive of music. You discover it and conceive of it. You don't actually write anything of music because it's not ours to create those sounds, but we can combine them in unique ways and manipulate them, but they're not ours to create. It's like always exists as a potential and as a reality, and that's a deeper discussion right there that I can't exactly entirely enunciate right now, but that's one thing I to aspire to, is to be able to enunciate deeper on that. But all those notes, the same ones, all those iterations of C, they're at each of those octaves there'll be a different pitch, but they're exactly doubled or halved, and that's why they sound the same, is because they're a function. When you hear a note, what makes it sound like itself is that it's actually, there's no such thing as one of anything. There's not even actually one note. Any note you play, it has over and undertones, and so you're actually playing all the notes that exist in any note. You're playing all notes that exist, because whatever you can hear to your ear that has meaning, that's distinguishable to your ear, it's eccentric. You're actually recognizing its eccentricity, but its eccentricity is manifest. All the other notes and sounds and all of existence itself are latent within that, but they give meaning to what's manifest through latency, and the meaning of the latency contrasted with the what's manifest. So what's manifest, like you hear that C, ding, you hear the meaning of that, but you also hear the absence of all else that's possible, and that absence, that latency, it gives the meaning and characteristic of that thing that gets to fly like that gets to stand out like that. Because so it's giving it support like that, even what you don't hear expressed in that. But it's so unique with each note. So any note actually has all the other notes. If you were to break it down in audio, you'd see all the other notes existing together with that, and supporting it and giving it meaning. But they're more or less expressed. You can hear different ranges of them in a single note or in a chord. So some of the beauty of a chord, it's not just that you would play 3 notes in tandem, but it's a way that the over and undertones and what's latent and manifest would exactly come in and out and ripple in and out, like kind of like the water on a lake, like water being disturbed by like a wakeboard or a boogie board. There's sophisticated ripples of that as a chord goes, but even as a single note goes, it's profound, but it's what gives it meaning like that. But then if you were to exactly mathematically double it or half it, some of those over and undertone series like that, the effects will be very similar at the different octaves like that. Probably not the same, not literally the same, if you wanted to be that technical about it, but because they just sound different, better or worse. So you could say just from that alone, it's not the same, but it would be it would function the same in music, in a musical piece, in a musical motion. To double or half it, you just transpose it up or down an octave by doubling or halving it, and it will sound a lot similar, and it will have some of the same value and meaning similar if it's actually calibrated at mathematically like that, such that one note has different iterations in different octaves. That is, it has different pitches in different octaves, but there's some form of function of one the other, half or doubled or quadrupled or I don't know what you call 8 times in a row, like quadruple, quintupled, sextupled, septupled, octupled, maybe 8 times larger. But then so you have the note is the spelling, which is probably the most arbitrary and hard. So probably maybe the reason people get ran off by the word inharmonic is because it's arbitrary, because actually notes themselves are arbitrary on a deeper level. Sometimes when something doesn't sit right with you or it irks you, there's a deeper thing about it that's not congruent, which is why it irks you. You don't know why it irks you, but it irks you because it's not congruent. So the concept of inharmonic might not be entirely congruent because it's arbitrary, but from one C to the other C, that's all the same note. But then the pitch is how, whatever the frequency is of any iteration or expression of a note is its pitch. And then it's so there's pitch, note, pitch, and tone. The tone is also the pitch, but the tone is like the uniqueness of so you could say that if you have like they're a little bit interchangeable. So if you had like different iterations of C, the pitch and note and a tone. There's nothing arbitrary about that. But a tone is a unique sound unto itself. And then that's where you get into the discussion of timbre. My teacher broke this down in his book. I'm not directly paraphrasing or quoting him, but I've come across this content. A lot of the music, if you read a lot of education about musical content, a lot of it is kind of interchangeable, and they're kind of rehashing the same things, but then they're putting their own take on it. Such too is music lessons. But my teacher, Mamsila Alexandric, he's commissioned to write curriculum for I think Duke University. He told me one time he was working on their curriculum, and then I hope that's not proprietary, but he had told me at one point he was consulting or working with them. But his book explains that too, and then in that book, I've seen that what I just divulged there about tone, pitch, and note. That's common across a lot of different music education resources, curriculum, and books would spell that out, express that. But then what he said is that that's true enough. But then another part of that is timbre, and timbre would be like so a pitch is anything can be called a note. Anything can be written as some form of note. But then also any particular note has certain meaning that is unique unto itself at different expressions of itself, that is different pitches of itself in different octaves. So a note can be anything, including anything. And a pitch is also a note, but also unique as a pitch, because a pitch can be different than a note is more limited than a pitch. A pitch can be one thing, then it can be doubled. Now it's still its own thing while doubled, but it's still technically a note if it corresponds to another pitch that is another note. Then you have a tone. A tone is the reality of a sound and can be described as a pitch and a note and a tone. But then each tone is unique unto itself, is that no tone exactly sounds like another tone that's produced by a different instrument or person. That's the unique sound of that note on that instrument at that octave. That's the timbre. And that's what would make people enjoy an instrument or not, and make an instrument sound beautiful or not. So you can play the same piece musically, and it might sound different on a piano versus a guitar. Some of the actual a piano is not exactly the same thing as a guitar or a like a wind instrument, because the rippling in the over and undertones, they would have to be different, such as that it has different timbre, one instrument from the other, and the timbre is part of the sophistication of the overtones and the undertones. But technically, there is some reciprocity and similarity between a guitar and a piano / keyboard and a wind instrument and on like that, and that's where anyone's guess is as good as anyone is, because once you have different instruments going, you can't say what sounds good or bad because it's subjective, but you can say that there's meaning in it, but it'd be different across one the other, and there's no way to really master what that meaning is or can be, or how it can be employed or expressed in musical statement. But it's to each their own at that point. But I just wanted to point out that distinction, is that's how you get all the way to timbre. But my teacher, Mamsay Alexandric, was more succinct and maybe original to combine the concept of note, pitch, tone, and also that to timbre. He has a very small but powerful book that he was writing. I bumped into, but I was talking along those lines with a man that I met at Dunn Brothers recently, and he was a very educated, erudite man, and he had lived abroad the world, and we also connected over the subject of Japan, because I've studied the intellectual Daisetsu Suzuki, and this person from Japan was impressed that I was familiar with the concept of sabi and wabi. That's the aesthetic around poverty and loneliness. And you could say that maybe when I experienced that sensation of joy and power, real power, that is to be myself and expressive as myself, to feel artistic, when I had that guitar and the coffee in my parents' unoccupied room, that in itself was a maybe experience of sabi and wabi par excellence, that is loneliness and poverty, but as is aesthetically, artistically pleasing or enjoyable to oneself first and then another. That's actually an exact expression of sabi and wabi, and that's vintage par excellence, artistry par excellence is according to the Japanese people, who are culture and taste and refinement in artistry, and also formidable and warriors and expressive, like in terms of poetry and haiku, par excellence. All that is Japan. So this man, it's interesting that I was inspired by Dunn Brothers Coffee and playing guitar many years ago, and then coming full circle and maybe embarking on another chapter, I bump into this man who could appreciate my scholarship and being familiar with Japan, and then also some of the statements that I made to him when I was talking to him about lucid. I walked in the venue, and there had been a chair conspicuously part stationed where it didn't serve any function from the position it was in. And I said that had to be the most meaningful thing in this room, because that's the greater anomaly. It's not different than the room, but it proves the room. And that's what he said. Then in the course of our conversation, we attracted some other people to the type of statements we were making. Some young men were interested in what we said. And then one of those young men, he was attracting a lot of women because he was like a handsome guy. You can't even see his eyes because he had on sunglasses that whole time. But a lot of people started filtering over our conversation. And then one of the most beautiful women there, and actually I'm not sure she was an owner. She was one of the highest ranking members of the staff there at that coffee shop. She exactly came and sat on that strange precarious chair because it was the only thing left around our conversation. It had actually been the impetus to start our conversation was that chair, and how conspicuously inconspicuous it was, and therefore meaningful as an anomaly in the environment. And then it proved that, in that it was an opportunity she sat and ate her lunch. I think she was about to go jet set for the holidays and take a vacation. But it was an opportunity. That chair was an opportunity for me to talk to that man, and then have that lady sit there, like kind of uncanny like that. But when I was talking to him, he was very learned. I've come across some very learned people like that they'd have to have a real background, a consequential background in this world to be speaking like that. And it was the second time, at least this year, that happened. But he was familiar with alchemy, and then also we were talking about lucid dreaming and different states of mind, like the different wavelengths of thought that a human being will go through in the different phases of sleep. And then in there, I was talking to him is that according to Arthur Avalon, in some of the thoughts of India, is that the deepest form of sleeping is actually is lucid dreaming. That is when you're asleep but don't know you're asleep. That's the deepest form of dreaming. I think that's actually what all of life is that the reason we're able to live 100 years on Earth, if we're healthy, is because you couldn't actually live 100 years. You'd actually be exhausted. You can sleep 100 years. So if you get to be 100 years old, it's likely exactly because you were having good sleep. Your whole life was actually sleep. You didn't recognize that, such as that you thought you were awake, that you had actually been asleep. So life really is a dream like that. And maybe I should probably get a little rest too while I make this video. But he could appreciate that I would be familiar with that. And the reason I was able to speak to him like that was because I had come across that in the works of Arthur Avalon. Arthur Avalon, when you first pick up Arthur Avalon, I started reading his book, The Serpent Power. It's actually about, when you hear that word, the serpent power, you may think that it's something like a little bit dishonest. And I actually might have thought that when I picked it up, but it's actually referring to Kundalini. That's your body's in ceaseless motion. Your body's never not functioning and having motion, such as this universe itself. It's ceaseless motion, but still equipoise and rest within motion, which makes the motion viable. But all the activities of your body have a support, and that's understood to be called Kendra, also the seat of Kundalini, like the sacrum, and that can be roused by either substance, trauma, shock/trauma, circumstance, substance, mantra, yoga postures, things like that. All those are different degrees of what could actually be described as trauma. And I was saying it at the beginning of this live stream, the iteration before this, if I have the same outfit on that got interrupted, is that I think that some of our people's preoccupation with drugs in what's called drugs. I've made the distinction between entheogens and what's called drugs in the United States, as drugs is a buzzword and part of social engineering, but it does actually describe some different things that can be very inimical substances, especially as they've been bastardized, appropriated, and curated unethically and sourced unethically by human beings for a profit incentive. But the reason that people are bent, have a bent about bent means like a very strong preoccupation and interest in thing and habit, is the reason people have a bent for drugs is like in the movie Lord of the Rings, when they were wanting that ring the whole time, they were having a bent about that ring. The reason people have a bent about drugs is because they sense that they're stifled from being themselves. The real thing that people are dealing with more than the trauma, because if you think about it, some of the trauma may have actually been enjoyable potentially. I would think that like sometimes that's the interesting thing they talk about, like sometimes you hear about children I don't mean to be egregious like this, but just for the sake of truth and truth sharing and to be teachable, a lot of times they would talk about the sensation of the experience of children being victimized by adults in schools and like their preceptors or different influential people in schools. If you're like, I grew up in the inner city and in schools in the inner cities, and in the inner cities you always have people who are very savvy in these schools. Like you have like security people, chaperones, and different administrators that are different degrees of leaders in the school. But a lot of them, they're very cool and savvy, and they're not removed from the trends. Some of that is necessary because in order to gain the compliance of the students, you need rapport. Rapport goes a lot further than authority in itself for its own right, because authority is almost like it's a necessary, the sensation of authority, the potential of authority is actually a lot more effective than authority itself. Authority is violent, it's traumatic, and it's largely useless. Authority is really actually useless. It's kind of like, if you can imagine those games in the arcade where that little head pops up and then you try to whack it down like that, you're not really getting past that thing, and you're not going to beat that thing like that at any point. That's like authority. But there needs to be the potential for authority. So the potential for authority is actually the authority. Similar with power. Power in itself doesn't achieve a lot. How powerful is the military, yet how also has the military, much as it already failed us and itself a lot. The military has failed humanity and human outcomes by the world over, by and large. Militaries, most of them are just simply atrocities and blunders and failures and temporary delays before the real politics are settled, likely away from the battlefield or better than the battlefield could ever do. But that's some of the limitation of power, is that it becomes redundant and it defeats its own purpose, and it also is out of control because you can't control anything that you do. You can't control the reverberations of that and the outcome of that and the fallout of that, try as you may. Not the least of which murdering people and blowing things up. So there's no end to, but so the things are people present things like, even the military, like it's very calculated and they know what the hell they're doing with the cause and the effect. The ends justify the means, yeah. But when the means are that dire and that critical and that crucial, the ends never stop. But so in these schools, you need to have people that are savvy, that have banter and rapport to gain the real true compliance and traction with the students, and not actually be demoralizing to them or fail to gain their compliance other than to threaten force, which is also traumatic, or use force, which is traumatic and violent and blundering and useless. But you'll always have these very savvy people in the schools like that. But a lot of times they'll get into mishap and mayhem like that because they're too damn savvy for their own job. So like I remember when I was young, there would be some of these administrators that it didn't happen when I was in the school, but they'll get in trouble because they're getting too familiar or too friendly or too cool around the kids like that. These administrators like that. But you think about it, and you can imagine that it would be very traumatic to the development of a human being to have an experience before they were ready or not. But sometimes you don't think about like what some things you can imagine, like heaven forbid if something were to happen with a female student like that. But you don't think about what would happen if a male student actually had traction and success with a female faculty member or a beautiful female faculty member like that. You don't think about that, but there have been, I think the YouTuber Rollo Tomasi, that's a reference. I think there's a movie called LA Confidential, and so he had appropriated that handle, and then he made it his pseudonym and nom de plume for his book series, Rollo Tomasi, The Rational Male, and then also his YouTube channel, Rollo Tomasi, The Rational Male. But he actually treated that topic in some of the history, the long-standing history between male students and sometimes their female preceptors who were very young women, or just a reckless women around young boys. But human beings are still human beings. Try as you may, introduce penalties as you may, human beings are still human beings. But if you think about the experience of that, like a boy, an adolescent male, or like a young adult male as an older high school male with a beautiful female preceptor administrator, what have you, you can imagine that that wouldn't be good for their development. You don't know how that's not good for their development, but you know it's not good for their development. But you can also imagine that that might actually be like kind of what a lot of young males would only dream of. Like, man, I wish that could have happened for me. Heaven forbid. I don't mean to agree with that. But one is that that type of activity, it doesn't the interacting, interfacing with other human beings, it doesn't go over the same way between with a female and a male, because the human body has different functions and purposes and strengths and weaknesses, but so too does the psyche. So that experience would actually be different for a female versus a male. But in the case of a male, is that that's exactly what males fantasize about. That's what they sometimes get into trouble with when they do different underage stuff, as it's not necessarily illegal, but it's costly, like in terms of pregnancy or STD. But some of the reason that would be that, because if a male student had an experience with a female teacher, the reason that would be very, one of the reasons is that would be very taxing, detrimental for the student, would because it would be too much of a good thing. It's not that it's not necessarily a good thing for a male human being, a now viable male human being, whether of the legal age of majority or not, to have that experience or not, physically, biologically. As the maturation goes, is that it's too much too soon. It's too much power. That's a lot of power, because everyone is fantasizing about these beautiful teachers, whether they're honest or not. From a lot of, like, by the time boys are already like just very like barely off into middle school or whatnot, they can appreciate what a beautiful woman is looking at that. But then all the other students are also like that too. But now here go, this one actually did have an experience with that teacher. That's way too much power too soon. And then the power begets the sensation for more power. So once that student has already had an experience like that, how do you top that? How do you rival that? Not that they won't try. They'll be actually daunted by how much of power that was. So either that relationship, it's not viable with that teacher because it's not legal in the first place. But that too, they couldn't replicate that necessarily with that teacher if they wanted to, because it's too difficult and illegal. But that too, what would it be like then with actually age appropriate things, or once they graduate with other people, that as it's now illegal for them, coming off of that. So it's too much power too soon. So I had a friend like that when I was in middle school. When I was in I didn't have a friend that did anything illegal, but when I was in I came to the North in 6th grade, and my desk mate was my best friend. His name was like the same thing as a very healthy vegetable. But by the time I was good at sports, but he was just very it's kind of strange. Like, some people are just simply heartthrobs. Like, they can't. I don't know what it was about him. He had like that it factor, but really, really strong. Like, my whole life, I've never met someone that had more of an it factor with the opposite gender since the time of being young like that. So by the time, that's how it was when we were in elementary. Like, when we were in elementary, I could hold my own with him because I was good at sport. I was the best one at basketball according to the other peers and the other basketball players. So I could get attention, like, from a lot of pretty girls in elementary school. But all the pretty girls in our elementary school, they had it out bad for him. Some of them liked me a little bit. They thought I was cool. I was cool enough to hang out with him, and I was cool around him and also not around him. But they had it out bad for him. You got it bad. Like, they had it really out bad for him in elementary. Then when we got to middle school, the whole middle school had it out bad for him. We're barely beginning 7th grade. Not even 7th grade hadn't even started yet, and he's already dating one of the 8th graders, one of the beautiful 8th graders. This 8th grader, she don't seem like she's not pretty. She's pretty, but she's like one of the girls that are pretty, but like, you don't get to see her being pretty like that. She's just a regular girl like that. But if you see her in a certain light, in a certain mood, she's pretty like that. So she just had like he was so beautiful to her that she had a problem about him, and she was gonna have to see about getting to know him like that. Just the kind of type of vibe time that he was, and I was his friend, so I would be not too far away. I would be hanging out with him away from school. So I knew that he had that going on with the 8th graders like that, and we're barely in 7th grade, barely starting 7th grade. But the whole damn school was in love with him like that. The whole school was in love with him. And even, like, I remember he didn't come on with us to high school very much. But when I was at the latter stage of high school, I was a senior in high school, And these girls as seniors in high school that had went to that junior high with us were like, yeah, but I remember so and so. Damn, man. I knew him very well because my first friend when I came to the north, he lived in my not far away from me, like a mile away. So I'd be hanging out with like we had like a natural rapport with him with a banter. So I was really close friends with him since I met him in sixth grade, and then we got to middle school. He was already in like a different social reality than me because of how cool he was and how many parties he got involved in. I still was like a regular student where I'd be cool later in middle school, like eighth grade. But before I got that far, like seventh grade, I had to start at the. You got to start somewhere, man. You got to start at the bottom and work your way up. But I actually put in the work to get up there. But I had some of the hard knocks. But he just went straight the hell to the top like that since before seventh grade even started like that. But all I meant to say is that I met him in high school. Like he came to our high school as a senior. Like he just barely was in there for like a few credits. But he was having like a problem with like the hard stuff. Like I was talking about drugs, this and that. But he seemed to be having a problem with the hard stuff. Like he just made a couple because like back then I didn't do drugs in school, and I don't know what he did, but he just made a couple comments that made me think that he was really living a rock and roll lifestyle. But all I meant to say is that he has so much of success because that's a lot of power. Like all these beautiful girls love you. Imagine whatever girl you had a crush on in elementary school, right? But also all the girls that were attracted to you in elementary school, right? And then middle school, the same girls that came from your elementary school, plus all the other elementary schools, plus the upperclassmen, all exactly in love with that same person like that. In all the slam books and all the everything, they're head over heels like that, and they really mean that shit. They're not kidding about that. They really are. They really mean that shit. How much they like that guy. That's a lot of power. How do you top that? How do you come back from that? So by the time I met him in when we were in high school, he needed something stronger. That's all I'll say. He just needed something stronger than that stuff. And I don't know how he went about that, but it looked like it was like a little bit like not it wasn't the best thing that happened for his development. And then too, he wasn't beyond getting his heart broken. So he did get his heart broken by some of these girls. And then it's kind of strange how you can have all the girls in love with you, but then by the time that you actually bond to someone, like you actually have a real feeling for someone. Because I think the girl that broke, I don't know what girl broke his heart, but it was like I don't think it would have been the prettiest girl because it was damn near. I don't know how you could be prettier than some of the girls that I've seen that liked him, but just any girl that. It's interesting how like some of these people who are like movie stars and heartthrobs, they got all these beautiful women in love with them, but the one that they actually fall for isn't the most beautiful of all of them, as you can understand, at not having experienced all those people. It's a deeper thing that we see in people and that we're attracted to. And I want to say that too, even for people that are very attractive, is that it's something deeper that is attractive about them and that they're attracted to too than just superficial things. But at a certain point, all that stuff, all that love, romance stuff, I guess it just became superficial to him at a certain point. So he needed that something harder than that. So I'm just saying, just as food for thought, is that I want to speak to that a little bit. Is that a lot of people, a lot of even adult men, they would know that it's wrong for like a male, a pubescent male or a older high school student to have that kind of experience like that, but they wouldn't know how that could be bad like that. And so a lot of men wouldn't know that. So I just want to put that as food for thought there, and wrong is wrong, but that's just for education. But I think that the deeper thing is that the way that you get past trauma, because but then the deeper thing too about even stuff that would be traumatic, like even that stuff as the males would go, or as the females would go, or as just anybody would go that have anything that's traumatic. What's more damaging than the itself is the reverberations and what that does to someone's disposition and able to express themselves and be enjoyed by other people in their inherent proclivities and disposition. And so I think that because of that, people are actually looking to be traumatized. So like people are looking for drugs because they know that drugs are some real ass traumatic ass shit to experience, but that's the only thing they can conceive of that will dislodge this greater trauma that is our education, this greater stifling that is our education and our upbringing and rearing around these schools that are actually there's a financial incentive and in different social programming. So you would think that, okay, so if a student can go all the way through school and no one ever did anything out of pocket or egregious around that student or for that student with that student. Thank heaven that they escaped trauma like that or being taken advantage of. Not necessarily. The actual training itself is the trauma itself. The successful training itself, if all the rules are conformed to by that student and all of the cadre of leadership that they experience their way through, that is exactly the outcome and the zenith of the actual stifling and dilution of their disposition and detraining and detuning of their instincts that amounts to a lack of enjoyment of life as oneself. That is the outcome of trauma itself, is what I'm saying with that. And that's what this preoccupation with drugs is, I think, itself, is that it's not just that you feel that good on the drugs, it's that you feel that good around other people. So you might mess around and get to be yourself around other people for once, and people might actually enjoy you for you, the real you as you. And now you can feel good about the real you as you because people enjoy the real you as you now, because you at least felt good around the drugs like that. But so it's almost, you could say that that friend that I had, who was beloved by all these beautiful girls, but also these brainwashed girls, because all those girls and all these students in schools are exactly being brainwashed that whole time. That is the detuning of their instincts. That is their trauma. That is their stifling in terms of expression. That impacts their outcomes and their experiences and their identity and their friendships, their whole life like that, as it serves them and as it doesn't. But you could say that he was tired of being brainwashed, and he was tired of all these other people that love him who are also brainwashed, and he wanted to be experienced as the real him and love for the real him, whatever he had to do to go about that. And that was bigger than just pretty people falling in love with you or even the sensation of love itself. Because they say that love is the biggest drug, but I beg to differ that truth is the biggest drug. Even bigger and badder than love is actually truth. And so when I met that person at the coffee shop, he went into the actual lore and legend of Arthur Avalon and what that's referring to. That refers to the story of the Holy Grail. And you had like Sir Lancelot, and I think one of them was Sir Lancelot, and he was daunted that he couldn't see Sir Lancelot. According to this man, as the story goes, he was seeking a worthy. He wanted to actually be defeated. He was actually frustrated with victory. He was doing these. It's interesting that that man, he was familiar with Japan, which has a history of like samurai, like gladiator type sword dueling tournaments to the death. Some of those, like a lot of people nowadays, they fetish like the martial arts belts, like black belt, and if you might even know about something like a red belt. But the way that you would actually get to that point, whether like in jujitsu or like a lot of real martial arts, is you have to go through these different tournaments and you have to face many formidable opponents. They try to replicate that like with the mixed martial arts sport,